things we're going to talk to you about, actually, because that's, hello, everybody, we're live. We went live as I was sort of still having a conversation. Do you want to start us off with an, that's so professional. Do you want to start us off with an introduction to yourself and your books, Heather?
Yeah, sure. Hi, I'm Heather Critchlow, and my books are Unsolved and Unburied. Unsolved came out last year in May, and Unburied came out yesterday, and they are about a true crime podcaster called Cal Lovett who investigates cold cases. And in Unburied, the second book, Cal is on the west coast of Scotland on holiday, and he gets drawn into investigating the cold case of a shooting in a farmhouse that devastated a local community. And meanwhile, his own sister's disappearance many years before sort of moves forward as police start digging in a scrapyard.
And the thing I was kind of mid-conversation of is that I've only read Unburied. And I feel like every author chat you have with people, especially when they write a series, they go, oh, it's written to be a standalone. So it's okay if you haven't read the rest of the series. And sometimes it is okay. And sometimes you kind of do need to read the rest of the series.
Yeah, I think it's it does ruin some things, because obviously you know which characters are in the second book, and therefore if you're reading the first book and that character's in peril, you kind of know, oh, they're going to be all right in the end. But yeah, they are, I think your editors do try and get you to write them in a way that means you don't have to have read the first book. And it's quite difficult to do, because as you're writing it, you've got to think, well, what do I know? What would readers know? What do they need to know? Because you don't want to do a big dump of information. But I was quite lucky with Canelo because they use external editors at different stages of the process, and there was at least one or maybe even more than one editor who hadn't read the first one, so they were great to be able to go, right, what's going on here, we need a bit more information, or no, this is fine. So yeah.
I was gonna say it did work. Like, I did feel like I could enjoy Unburied as a new reader to you, which I did enjoy it a lot. It's really good. But I did feel like I really enjoyed it, and I did feel like I could follow it all as a new reader, like, to the series. But I do kind of, there were points where I was going, I'm enjoying this so much that I kind of wished I'd have gone back, and I was like halfway through, and I was like, now I kind of wished I'd gone back and started at book 1.
Yeah, it's really hard. I know that myself when I want to read an author and they've got 8 books out, and I just think, oh, I really want to read the new one, but should I go back and read, you can't really go back and read 10 books if somebody's got a big established series. So I feel your pain.
I will go back and read book 1 though. Because it was really good. I like the kind of, it's quite unique being a true crime podcaster. I think that's quite an interesting sort of way of looking at things. What inspired that?
I've wanted to do it for ages because I love
Oh, Heather's frozen.
Have you still got me? Am I still here?
I can hear you. Yeah, see you back.
What happened then? Yeah, so true crime podcasts I've really enjoyed listening to them, and I particularly like ones where there's somebody picking up on a cold case that's been forgotten about. And so I kind of, for years I've wanted to do that, and I was writing other things that I was trying to get published and that weren't successful. And in the meantime, several other people have brought out books with true crime podcasters as protagonists. So it's quite a nice little genre now. There's a few different people who've done it or doing it, and everyone does it slightly differently. So it's quite good fun. I didn't really read many of them while I was writing the first book because I wanted to find my own way of doing it, and I didn't want to steal someone else's. But once I'd written Unsolved, I had a little binge of reading other people's podcast books, and it's fun because for me, I didn't feel confident in doing a police procedural where having all of the rules and regulations that the police would follow. But I used to be a journalist, not a true crime journalist, but I used to be a business journalist, and I felt a bit more confident writing a journalist.
My only experience, no, I think I've read one other book that has like a podcast in. Otherwise, my experience is like only Murders in the Building.
Yeah, I haven't actually watched that. I've got that on my list of things to watch. I've heard good things.
That's glorious because they do a podcast, but they are not as good as like your podcaster, who is actually quite thorough and they kind of sort of bumble through.
That's one of the things I love about podcasts, though. I think, especially in the early days of them, some of them were really slick, and some of them were just somebody with a microphone or an iPhone off investigating. And I think the barrier to entry is quite low, which is really nice. It's not like TV. You don't have to have a big glossy production to do it. You can just go and start one up.
And there are people, isn't there? I remember seeing kind of a documentary or something where you get these people who watch or make podcasts and things. There are people who do genuinely help to solve crimes.
Yeah. I mean, some of my favorite ones, there's a podcaster called David Ridgen, who's a Canadian podcaster. And I really like his style. There's then a podcast called Up and Vanished, where they solved the murder of a teacher who had gone missing many years before. And I just think that's the really nice thing about them, is that it gives a voice to forgotten cases and victims and their families who might otherwise have not got the attention. The police don't have the resources necessarily. And I really like the fact that it's another threat to people who've done something years past and think they've got away with it, and then some podcaster comes along with their microphone and starts investigating, and perspectives change as well, I think, with podcasts, because a lot of these cases are 20, 30 years old, and then people might not have been willing to speak at the time, whereas now their allegiances might have changed perhaps, and there's lots of cases that get solved so far in the future that it's kind of a nice feeling, I think, to know that it's not ever, all is not lost.
Donna said hello to us, as has Sam. Sam says she loves Unsolved and can't wait to read it from Byron. I know she's a huge fan, Sam. We speak about like our interviews and like authors and things after we've done them, and sometimes you'll just get a message like after a chat, and it'll be like, I love this book so much. So
that's lovely.
I'm sure I definitely got a message like that after Sam had interviewed you about Unsolved. What I thought was interesting as well, I'm trying to think of how to word this without doing any spoilers, because I think there's quite a lot of stuff in the book, isn't there, that you have to be a bit careful about.
Yes.
There's sort of some suspects, and the way they present themselves to the media kind of changes the story a little bit. And I quite like that. I like the way that you sort of used how people kind of can twist sort of publicity to sort of change the narrative of what they were.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? And I think there's so much of, I think, especially these days online, you do get groups like backing very unlikely people, and even the most kind of obviously unpleasant people sometimes get a following or are charismatic enough to convince people of their I find that really sinister, I think, and that is definitely something that I'm playing with Cal and his sister's case, particularly with the media not necessarily being on the side of the victim, and the victim being painted in a particular way. That was definitely a theme in the first book as well, because the case that Cal investigates in the first book is a young woman who isn't necessarily easily likable, and I wanted a complex female victim, because I do think people get treated differently depending on your impressions of them and the way that they're portrayed. And she was a woman ahead of her time who, wasn't necessarily the most sympathetic victim, and did that then influence how her case was investigated? And I think it does in real life all the time. Women who are victims are called prostitute rather than, a mother or a daughter or a sister. And
I think that's and I think people do it without realizing. There's a bit at the start of the book where the crime that's being investigated is happening, and they're describing the woman's interaction with her children, and you kind of almost rush to a judgment about it and then you realize different things.
Yeah, Yeah, I again, she's another woman that's not necessarily easy to like all the time, and she's flawed, and it was quite difficult to write some of those. But I think I wanted to really write a woman who was very isolated in early years of motherhood, really struggling, and she's gone from a career where she was very much in control and had a very busy life living in Glasgow. And they've moved to this really isolated community, and she just doesn't really fit there. And she's not a natural mother. There's all these stereotypes about motherhood, or motherhood is painted in a certain way, and it's not always like that. It's hard, and it can be relentless and really, really, really difficult. And I suppose I wanted to show that, and then what would happen to somebody who perhaps didn't have the support that other people might have, or didn't have the strong relationships around her to protect her from the harder side.
Donna's saying that she keeps seeing your name come up on all the groups. And she's dying to read your books, but she swears her TBR grows by 5 when she finishes one book.
Yeah, I have a bulging TBR list, so I'm trying to get through my own. I know the feeling.
And just after Christmas is worse, isn't it? Because if everyone knows that you like books, you get more.
Yeah, I'm really trying to rein in my natural inclination just to buy loads of books. I'm making myself work through my shelves by my bed.
Yeah, me too. I'm kind of, I'm going to die under a pile of books if I don't actually.
There's worse ways to go, frankly.
A few months ago, my shelves here.
Wow.
They're neatly stacked now, right? But a few months ago, they weren't. They were a bit slightly more precarious, and about early hours of the morning, there were these massive thuds, and I was like, "Oh no!" Was something happened to the roof, or and we woke up and it was just books tumbling.
Oh, that's really funny. Is it a burglar? No, it's my books falling over.
My husband was like, "I swear, God, you're gonna die buried under a pile of books."
Oh, that's brilliant.
I mean, at least it wasn't a burglar.
It could have been worse. I had that once, but with we were asleep, and the rail in our wardrobe split, and all of the clothes fell off and banged into the wardrobe, and it was the most terrifying thing, because it was right next to the bed in the middle of the night, and you just bolt upright awake. But books are, a book landslide is a great one.
But I mean, it must have been pretty loud to have woken me up, because I'm not not an easy person to wake up. How do you I would imagine the problem, as I was reading this, I was trying to think about sort of the problems of carrying the series on, because I would imagine the problem with him being a podcaster is maybe he'd eventually run out of some things to investigate, or how do you keep it fresh?
Yes, so I wanted to have quite different podcasts in each of the books. So each book is a sort of mix of Cal's personal life and then a particular case that is resolved at the end of the book. So I'm working on the 4th at the moment, and there will be 5. The 3rd one I have chosen, so that's in edits at the moment, and I've chosen quite a different victim. I have a male victim, a young student who's missing, and I wanted to do something a bit different there. And again, the 4th book, I've tried to find something a little bit different. It starts out more of a mystery, perhaps, than obviously a crime, but then develops from there. So, but yeah, I don't think you'd ever run out of the weird and wonderful podcasts that there are out there. I just find fascinating. And the challenge is, I think it's the geography sometimes is a little bit tricky. It's more, how does he get hold of this particular case? And why does this fall into his lap? And why does he decide to do this one? And then how does he get there from where he lives in the Midlands? And if I need him to be here to interact with his mother, I can't have him pinging up and down the country too much. I didn't really think that through when I started the series. But to try and get through that, around that.
Well, there's going to be 5. Did you always intend there to be 5 books, or?
No, I intended there to be 1, to be honest. I wasn't really thinking beyond the first book. And then when we pitched the book to editors, we pitched a second one as well. And then it sort of went from there, really. And I think because Canelo has such a strong history of doing really, really good series, it just kind of developed out of that. And then I just feel that 5 is quite a nice arc for him. I know what's going to happen and will kind of resolve and tie up his personal story quite nicely by the end of the 5th book, I think. So yeah, I quite like the idea. I think the 5 will look nice on the shelf as well. So
well, it's good to know. Are they all going to have a title beginning with U?
Yes, it's an absolute nightmare, but yes, they are. And I don't know if I'm allowed to say what the 3rd one's called, but anyway, Unsound is going to be the 3rd one. But yes, I mean, it's just as well it's not going to go on to be a sort of 10 or 12 book series, because we would definitely run out of unwords.
Liz, have you ever read Liz Mysteries books?
I haven't. No, they're on my radar. Yeah.
She has a Gus Maguire series set in Bradford, and they all had, I think, U kind of titles, U and another word. And
Yeah.
she used to have polls, like after a while of like just what the words use for a title.
Yeah, it's great. But I mean, my first book was actually originally called Unspoken, and proofs went out with Unspoken. And then it didn't really work so well when it came to the cover and it being obvious what sort of book it was. So it was then changed to Unsolved. But the other thing is that a lot of unwords are really long, and that wouldn't work either. So it has to be an unword that's short enough to look good on a cover. But luckily, it's not just my problem. There's a nice team of people at Canelo helping come up with these things.
Yeah, I mean, Canelo, we say this regularly, like on screen and off, that Canelo are kind of a mark of really good quality.
Oh, yeah, I love their books. I really do. I'm really enjoying being part of that stable and discovering the other authors that are published by Canelo as well. It's quite nice to have a little group of us.
I think they're like, now they're a sign that you look for. You know, when you're looking for a new author, like if it's a Canelo one, I'll be like, well, yeah, because every other one I've read from Canelo I've always really enjoyed. You know, they're always good.
Yeah, they have really great editors there, sort of picking well, I think.
Yeah, as Sam says, we're huge Canelo fans.
Good. Long may that continue.
I'm sure it will. Well, there's 3 more books from you to come. So
yeah.
Is it time to sort of think about what you would write after? Have you got any other ideas? Or
so I do. I am actually going to have another couple of books with Canelo as well that we haven't announced yet, but they're slightly different. I think they will still appeal to crime readers, but they're not purely crime. So that, yeah, my focus is very much on the final 3 Cal novels, and then another 2 that we're working on as well. And actually they will come out in amongst the Cal ones. They're not going to be after that. And then I do have other ideas. I have another series that I'd quite like to write. I actually wrote one of them and we submitted it to Canelo before Cal, and I think the character and the protagonist in that is quite interesting, and I would really like to go back to her, but I would have to probably rewrite that story to do that. But that's something I'm interested in doing in future. So it's more finding the time to do it. The ideas are all there. It's just fitting it all in.
So you said by the end of book 5, we're going to sort of wrap up Cal's story arc.
I think so. Yeah, certainly. His key mystery in his life. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. I'm not saying I would never go back to him. I have ideas how I could in the future, but no, that would be him tied up.
I think you can carry on a series even if you answer sort of a key thing, can't you? Because your fans of it would still know what had happened.
Yes.
And he can still be interesting without.
Yeah. And you can always find new and terrible things to do to people. I always feel really sorry for him because he's happily living his life. He's got everything sorted, and then you've got to turn it all upside down again and make him a bit miserable for a while. So yeah, there's always something to do.
He definitely sort of has a few miserable moments in Unburied, doesn't he?
Yeah, he really does. He really, really does. I'd like to say it gets better for him, but it can't. Poor Cal.
Poor gal. Donna says that's a lot of stuff to hold in your head. How do you keep? Do you have like a way of keeping all these things separate?
What, the different books you mean, or the series? Yeah, so I guess I'm only working on one thing at a time, and the book that's going to be the first of these slightly different books is already written. I did that. I kind of started that when Cal was on submission originally, and then I put it down to write the second Cal book, and then went back to it afterwards. So I do quite like chopping and changing, especially when I'm editing. If I'm doing a first draft, I kind of need to focus on that particular book for that time. But it is a little bit of a juggle because I have a day job still, and I've got children at secondary school and the dog and everything. So it is, sometimes I do struggle to find the time to devote to it.
You do really well if you manage to juggle all of those things.
It's at times it teeters on the edge and then pull it back.
I take the approach of just chaos, running everything.
Sometimes you have to embrace the chaos, don't you?
It all works out in the end. You just need to. I mean, sometimes deadlines sail past, but
yeah, I found Canelo really great to work with because I did struggle a bit with the third book. So the second one I wrote quite quickly and quite happily before the first one even came out. But then I think there's something about the year that your first book comes out, you being read for the first time, you're just sort of taking other people's opinions on board. And even when they're really lovely opinions, it still makes you kind of think as you're writing and maybe write in a different way for a bit. And I really struggled to write Cal for a little bit. So I was working on the other book then. And yeah, Canelo were really great because I didn't, we moved deadlines a little bit. And I think probably the third book needs more editing than the first two, because it was one that I did tie myself in knots with a little bit. It's got quite a complicated plot and it's got different timelines, and there's sort of people that have to know things at specific times but not know things at other times. And it was just, I made it quite hard for myself last year. So I was really glad to get that down and be in the editing process now.
Is it quite hard then to go back and talk about the second book when your head's still a bit full of book 3?
It is a little bit, actually. And this is the first interview, because the book only came out yesterday. This is the first interview I've done about the second book. And I did just suddenly think, wow, I was, when your head is so in there. And at the moment, mine's in the fourth book. So yeah, it's fun though. It's quite nice to go back to think about it.
Should we give people who are watching, like Donna, who needs to go away and add your book to her
Sorry,
ever-growing TBR pile, a bit of a description of what it's about?
Unburied.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So Unburied starts. It's set on the west coast of Scotland. And Cal is having a well-earned holiday and doesn't intend to get dragged into anything, but is approached by somebody who recognises him in this small community on the west coast of Scotland. And they ask for his help in solving a case of a farmhouse shooting that happened 14 years earlier and has never been solved, and really sort of devastated their local community. And he is very reluctant to get involved with this and says no initially, but actually in the end he does get sort of persuaded to help. And so he bases himself there and he starts looking into what might have happened in this shooting. And it's a bit of a mystery. And meanwhile, because his own sister disappeared when he was a child and her body has never been found, the after events in the first book that I won't kind of go into too much, the police have a lead and they start digging for her body.
It sells itself, doesn't it? Just from the description. Obviously, Donna, when you're going back to add these to your pile, start with the first one.
Yeah, go. Yeah, do the first one. There's only two.
Yeah. You won't regret it. Do you think? I think they'd make really good kind of TV adaptations.
Oh, that would be lovely, wouldn't it? Let's hope. Yeah, that would be fun.
Would you make a cameo if it was adapted?
Yeah, I'd like to be like a really grumpy person in a shop or something. I think I could do that.
the lady in the shop in the book is quite nice.
She is. Maybe I'd be like one of the school mums at the gate, one of the really miserable school mums, something like that.
Is that a thing? This is a thing I always wonder, right? Because I've obviously never seen the other side.
You're the teacher in the school.
The things in the school, but there's like a whole thing where the school mums all go off and have like their little thing, and so is that genuinely a thing? I always presume that was just a fiction thing. I wonder if it's a real life thing.
I think it must be. I think the thing is, with situations like people dropping children at school, I think there's always these perceptions people form of each other, and then there'll be groups of people, and maybe other people have views about them. And I think it is one of those really weird things where you're just thrown together with this set of people. The only thing you really have in common is that you have children that are the same age, and that you're, particularly with primary school, secondary, you don't really know. I don't know my kids' friends' parents much at all, but in primary, you see these same people at exactly the same time every day that you pick up. And I didn't pick up every day from school. And I think it does create these divisions. You know, people who are working and can't get there might not see the same people, but they might do the after school club pickup. So yeah, I think it's probably just human nature, isn't it? Groups and I think when you throw in, particularly in this book, it's really Bryony has postnatal depression and hasn't really adjusted to her life in this community, and so she's looking for differences, and she's looking for how she isn't fitting in, and I think maybe some of the judgment that she feels from the teachers and the other parents is real, and some of it's imagined perhaps, and then she almost isolates herself because she isn't able to reach out to other people,
which I think is kind of one of the quite powerful bits of the story, isn't it? Because as you unwind like Bryony's story, kind of realize more of what's going on, and it changes. You keep thinking that you have an idea of her and what she was like, and then the next chapter will come and you're like, no, I was wrong.
You know, one of the hardest things about writing these books is that when you have your victim and your, you know, criminal in your case, you kind of want to change, like you can't write them a happy ending. And so as I wrote her, I really felt for her and understood her, and oh yeah, and then I'd kind of remember, oh hang on, things aren't going to end happily for her. We know that from the prologue of the book. So yeah,
I realize we're not giving anything away by saying about that, but yeah, I think it's amazing because you're really drawn into her as a character. And like I said, you sort of read the first bit. I sort of thought, I read the first part of it, the prologue, and I was like, I almost had from reading lots of crime books, I almost had a different place and a different kind of person in mind.
I really wanted to do that. It makes it very difficult to talk about the book, unfortunately, without spoiling it. But your view of her might change,
and it dramatically does, and I think that's a really clever thing. And I think that's probably what you would get from, I've never listened to a true crime podcast, but I would imagine that as you were learning more about the case, that is kind of what would happen. You would change your views of.
Yeah, I think so. And I think, I mean, as well, when you're listening to a podcast, like I think you really bring your own prejudices and you bring your own views to it. Because when I was listening to something recently that had police officers in it, and they were doing things that looked quite suspicious, and this was being investigated years later, and under today's lens, where there's been so much about police corruption and all of the stuff that in the Met in London, my view was just like, well, it was obviously the police. It has to have been them. They have to. That's such suspicious behaviour, and it wasn't. You know, in the end, and that was quite interesting to have that new prejudice challenged almost, that it was something completely different in the end. But someone always knows something. That's the thing. It's just getting
and that's the thing that Cal says as well, isn't it? In the book, he kind of says, you know, things change, and someone will tell you something that they didn't think was important at the time, or
they'll protect somebody then and they won't later. And I think people often change in time, you know, perhaps they become a parent or something themselves, and then they suddenly see a victim or somebody in different eyes, and they're not able to protect the person that they were willing to protect before.
And that's, I mean, I think the real sort of standout of the story for me from reading it was the way that you were so intertwined. It's quite a small cast of characters for the story, but you get so intertwined in their lives and their personalities and how they change, and they literally change from chapter to chapter, so you're kind of going through with them, and you get so invested that you just, like, it was amazing.
Oh. I mean, the podcasts, I think, really do that, because you listen to podcasts and you hear the voices sometimes of people, and you hear their families, and it does give you kind of whole new view of somebody.
Also, set in a really beautiful part of the world. So the photography kind of helps, doesn't it? Like, there's a very real sense of like that isolation and things, you know, kind of like isolating herself a little bit, but also just geographically slightly isolated.
Yeah, definitely. It's a sort of fictional mashup between Plockton and the Shield Peninsula, because I didn't want to sort of do an actual place as such when it's such a small community, and I haven't lived there and I don't know it kind of well enough. But I love spending time there, and it's just so beautiful and inspiring that I find landscape one of my starting points. And maybe that's why my third book I didn't find so easy, because it's actually set in the city. It's set in Edinburgh. And so I didn't have any hills to fall back on. Well, there's Arthur's Seat in Edinburgh, but I didn't have the same landscape inspiration to go for.
He goes to Scotland quite a bit for someone who's in the Midlands.
He does, yeah. Well, in book 3, he moves to Scotland, so that sort of solves some of the issue.
Well, maybe put him in the Midlands to begin with.
I didn't think that through, really. I just wanted him to be an outsider. I was born in England and then moved up to Scotland when I was 10, and so I'm kind of used to that perspective. And I just didn't really want him to be London. I wanted to be somewhere different, and I just picked the Midlands because why not? And then I have to write about somewhere that I don't know particularly well, which has involved things like Googling Birmingham Library to see what it looks like and all the places that Cal might go, and I'm on Street View trying to work out where he would park or what he would do. So yes, if I could do that again, I'm not sure I would choose a city I didn't know so well. I spent quite a bit of time in Manchester and Liverpool, and it might have made more sense to choose one of those.
But then I think that the Midlands is quite an untapped source for kind of crime fiction, and people do like things to be kind of set in there. There's like Will Sharratt who writes in Stoke, but there's not a lot of kind of Midlands based.
Yeah, it's the same with Aberdeenshire, actually, where the first book is set particularly. It's there's a few writers writing about Aberdeenshire, but not masses of them. So it's quite nice to do like areas that mean a lot to you, but not lots of other people have been writing about.
Yeah, because you must also, I think people will choose to read a book based on a location as well. So you will get some readers who are like, oh,
yeah,
you know, I know these locations. This is.
Yeah, I love it. When you get a book and you know the place, it's really fun to read.
So tell us about how you got involved with the Bloody Scotland debut list.
So my publishers entered me for the competition, and it was a real surprise to be shortlisted, because I've been to Bloody Scotland the year before and really loved the event, and I was hoping that one day I might be able to speak at it, and I didn't really dream that I would be shortlisted. And it was a really good experience, actually, because they were so supportive of the shortlist, and they did a lot to get our books out there and to get us all of us, all 5 of us, got a lot of help and attention from it. And that was really special. And actually that continued after the event. They recommended us to speak as a panel in Newcastle Noir, and that was just really lovely. It was a real boost, and I think it helped as well because bookshops in Scotland got very much behind the list as well, and that was really lovely.
They make a big difference, I think, but also, and we talked about this before we went live, they generally the lists are sort of stunning.
It was such a privilege to be on it with those, and so Fulton and Heather Darwin and Callum and Kate, who were on it, just amazing. And we all had such different books as well, that it was quite nice. Actually, I don't think we felt that there were two books that were kind of the same really. So no, that was a really special experience.
That and the McIlvenney Prize often end up with authors on my like sort of year-end top 10s because I'm like, they're so good.
It's a really.
I'd never want to pick the winner because I read the shortlist. Like me and Sam often interview the shortlist of both the McIlvenney and the Debut Prize, and we end up reading a lot of the shortlist, and I'm like, I could never choose.
Can't call it. Yeah.
No, you can't, because they're so good. And like you said, they're always so different. So it's like, how would you pick? How do you pick?
Yeah. I'm glad I don't have that problem.
But yeah, it must be good, and it must. Does it help with the? Did you notice like a sort of bump in sales and things from being involved?
Definitely noticed that. Where I was in a lot of more bookshops than I might have expected to be otherwise. I don't really know what it would have been like without that, but definitely there's a lot of bookshops in Scotland would have the shortlists for the McIlvenney and the Debut Prize on display, and people were just I think it means something. The Bloody Scotland name really was great for the bookshops. They really embraced it, and so for a debut it was just lovely, because I think realistically now, as you're coming into the industry, that it's not guaranteed that you'll be in bookshops, and it's not guaranteed that you'll necessarily where your book will end up and where it might be sold or not. So I was quite realistic, I think, and I wasn't sure whether I would see my book in Waterstones or anything, and then to be in those sorts of places was really incredible.
Have you done the excited author thing of taking photos of your books on the shelves?
Oh yeah. I've done a lot of that. I went up to because I live in St Albans, so I'm not kind of up in Scotland all the time. I tend to, like, I'm going up next week and I'm going to pop in and visit sort of bookshops in different places, and so I've sort of called ahead and I'm planning to go there, and there will be lots of pictures of me on social media holding my book in different bookshops next week, I think.
Brilliant. They're on shelves in Yorkshire. I've seen your books.
Oh, that's good to know.
So around the country.
Yeah, I love it when people send me pictures of them. My dad went for coffee in his local charity shop or garden centre or something, and he sent me a picture of my book, and I think he was as surprised. I think it was a charity shop. It was my first charity shop picture. So yeah.
Who reads your books first?
So I'm lucky to have a sort of supportive group of author friends and a writing group who I did a writing course with. And so my writing group, we meet for the last 5 years now since we did this course together. We've met monthly, and we all submit 1,000 words of whatever we're working on every month, and the rest of us kind of dissect it. And we now know each other's stories and characters really, really well. So they are my absolute first readers, because they read it like they've read the beginning of the 4th book, and there's only about 5,000 words of that written. So that's first. And then I'm lucky that I've got some really lovely author friends who will read the whole thing quite quickly and give me feedback, and my agent, and then it goes to Canelo. But I mean, the 3rd book submission was so tight that my agent got it when Canelo got it. So she's read it and then given me her thoughts. And I'm waiting for, and I've had sort of top line thoughts from Louise, my editor there, and then I'm waiting for the structural edit. So whoever I can get to read it, basically, because I always think the more eyes you can get on something, the better.
Donna says she lives in Dunstable and knows St Albans well.
Dunstable Downs, not far from here.
I don't think I've ever been to St Albans. I'm sorry.
Yeah, yeah, it's not somewhere you necessarily have reason to, but it's very conveniently situated for getting north and for being near London.
Yeah, I mean, it helps, doesn't it? You tend to, if you have a reason to commute, you do tend to sort of migrate to those kind of places, don't you, that are easy to
Yeah,
get
yeah,
to. I was
definitely.
in the Midlands for a while for that kind of reason. It was like easy for my parents to commute from.
Yes. Connections.
Yeah. It's a good reason. There's only to move somewhere, isn't it? My parents don't need a lot of reason to move places. St Albans Cathedral's pretty, apparently.
It is. It is. My friend Rachel Block, the author, set a crime book there called The Fall, where in the opening chapter somebody falls from the roof of St Albans Cathedral. So she spent a lot of time going around and discovering its wonders.
Amazing. I've often wondered if you turn up as crime author to these places and go, can I see like where I would push the victim would fall from?
Yeah. Yeah, there is a lot of where would I hide the body? It makes you
then
quite.
have friends who send you like good kind of body hiding locations, or
It's funny actually. My children have kind of got in on it, which is slightly worrying. I did. My son, when he was in primary school, kept writing crime stories as his pieces of work at class, and I think his teachers eventually said, can we do something where someone doesn't die and there isn't a body? And I was like, come on, well done. Yeah.
have you been invited into the school then to come and do a talk?
No, well, so the secondary school, I don't know. It's difficult because my books aren't really reading for school kids. Like they've got them in my kids' school library, but only for the older ones. So yeah, I would do it if they wanted me to. But I've been there actually. The librarian at my children's school is an author, and she had a book launch there. So I kind of went in, and it was really interesting to hear all the kids were actually asking the kind of questions anyone would ask for a panel. They wanted to know how she got her agent and about her audiobooks and things. And so it was good. Yeah.
That would be good. If you came to my school, you would not get asked the normal questions you got asked at a panel. They are legend. We had an MP in at our school recently, and some of the questions were brilliant.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, you've got to be on your game, haven't you, to answer these things. Can't get it by.
They do. They definitely have. They definitely have a way with questions. They keep you on your toes.
Yes, I bet you're used to it.
I am, but yeah, it's kind of fun when you get people who come in who aren't used to it.
Yeah, I bet. I don't know how good I'd be. I've always admired teachers. I really don't think I could. I used to teach kids canoeing. When I was a student, I trained as a canoeing instructor, and I spent a few summers teaching children in Docklands in London. And I was just constantly counting that they were still alive, because I would have 8 of them and I would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Oh, they're all still on the surface doing what they should be doing.
That is actually the worst part. You know, when you take them out and you have to count them constantly.
Yeah. Head counts.
Them back on, and I'm like, is there this many of you? Yes. Are you all from our school? Yes. One piece. Yes. Right, we can go.
Oh, fantastic.
And you get the odd kid who'll be like, no, I'm such and such from somewhere else. Like,
yeah.
So what have you read recently that you've really enjoyed? Let's go away from.
So I am reading a proof at the moment that is brilliant, which is coming out in March. It's by Susie Aspley, called Crow Moon. It's an Arenda book, and that is fantastic. It's really atmospheric. Lots of dripping Scottish forests and mysterious bodies and kind of witchy goings on at the moment. So I'm really enjoying that. I've recently read Fiona Cumming's latest one, All of Us Are Broken, which is amazing, like really brutal and incredible. I love her books anyway, so I always read her books. And what's the other good one I read the Lisa Jewell, None of This Is True, at Christmas time, and that was brilliant. So yeah, And then I read sort of dystopia and things as well. So I always try and intersperse some crime reading with some dystopia and other books.
Give me a good dystopian recommendation, then I love dystopian books.
So my favourite book of the last few years, probably at all, was The Stranding. I don't know if you've read The Stranding by Kate Sawyer.
No, I haven't.
It basically starts, there's you never really exactly find out what happens, but basically the world ends and everywhere is destroyed, and she survives by climbing into the carcass of a whale. She climbs into the whale's mouth with another man that happens to be on the beach, and she's around the other side of the world. She's in Australia or New Zealand, I can't remember, and you kind of know that home is gone and that it's coming this way, and then she has to make a life afterwards. But that's interspersed with her story of why she was traveling in the first place and what happened in her life before this, and it's just so beautiful. I love it. But those are the books. I think the dystopian type books are the ones that keep me up until 2 a.m. reading them. There's just something about them that's so compelling and so primal and terrifying.
It's a really interesting genre, isn't it? Are you not tempted to sort of dip into writing that yourself?
Well, that might be the sort of direction that my new Canelo books are going. So,
exciting.
I will definitely be excited to talk about that one, because I can talk about dystopian fiction for a long time.
This is marvelous. Well, if that is the way they go, then we definitely need to book you back, because I could talk about dystopian fiction for a long time as well.
Yeah, it's brilliant, isn't it? It's just so.
Yeah, Sam teases me because she says I really like really bleak books.
Yeah, I do too. Something. So, I mean, I sometimes have to space them out a bit because it can be quite traumatic to read, can't they? But yeah,
you can dip in and out, can't you? You can read like a bit of it and then go to something a bit lighter, and
intersperse it with something fluffy and nice, and then into cold, hard end of the worlds.
Or just weird worlds, because they're not always an end of the world, are they? Sometimes they're like a weird, kind of almost like a dictatorship or a strange society.
Yeah, it's what comes in. There's a vacuum, isn't there? And then what's left afterwards, and how does it get? It's like the zombie series as well. I think I quite like the Last of Us and things on Netflix. Those weird, because I also have this real interest in buildings collapsing and plants taking over and these cities that are completely empty, and I just find all of that really evocative and inspiring. So love it.
Excellent. So we've got more of that to come, and more Cal.
Yes. Slightly different.
Really different. So we covered why you made him a podcaster. With his backstory, we won't touch on it too much, but with was that always like a part of your? Did you have in your mind like where that backstory was going to go?
Like, so I sort of started with him. The very first thing I ever wrote for the book was a scene that's still in the first book. It's just a little bit in, where he is packing to go off and investigate a cold case, and his wife is basically saying, "You can't do this again. This is kind of killing our marriage," and he goes anyway. And so I kind of had to think, right, why is he so driven to do this that he would, risk the things? Because he loves his wife, he loves his daughter. He's not like a bad absent father type. That isn't him at all. And yet he's so driven to try and find justice for these families and victims that I needed to have something that really drove him and that was so basic to his life. And his sister going missing when he was 9 years old, and she was older than him, so she was 18 and he was 9, and they were really close, and she was very strong and very independent, and in a way she was the blueprint for all the women who are in his life later on, because his wife and daughter are very strong and very independent, and he likes he likes that, and that kind of comes from his sister. And so, I just had to come up with something really that was compelling enough that would explain why he engages in this kind of obsessive behavior.
That can be a weird thing if you have a crazy big age gap. There's a 10-year age gap between me and my brother, and when I was little, they went everywhere.
Yeah. I think it means you don't compete in the way that siblings of a similar age sometimes do. So Cal and his sister were never playmates, but neither were they sort of rivals, really. She was almost like another mother to him. And so, yeah, to lose that is really formative.
I mean, if you keep it, you get the best of both worlds. You kind of get a bit of time with a sibling and a bit of time being an only child.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really interesting experience.
Yeah, it was kind of good, I would say, in that way. But yeah, obviously, like having a big age gap is quite interesting. But yeah, that's a thing like I really kind of gelled with Cal. I was like, I know what that's like having an older sibling. It's a very different relationship, and he definitely has that. Like, it's really well explained in the book, isn't it? It's quite, like you said, it's not like a proper relationship with it, is it? And it really affects him, like his thing, which you would expect.
Yeah, and I think he finds that hard to understand in a way because he only knew her for 9 years, and here we are 35 years later, and you know the ripples of that have had such an effect on his family and his family relationships. And I mean, his father is dead by the time the first book starts, but he has a very complicated and difficult relationship with his mother. And yeah, there's just so much there that has been destroyed and damaged by the loss of his sister, and in the way that she, you know, they don't have the answers, they don't have justice, they can't really grieve because they don't know what happened to her.
But that's another interesting thing, I think, that you get in the book that you don't get in a lot of crime fiction, is you sort of see the impact of the crime sort of instantly, don't you, in most crime fiction? And you don't see like the long-term effects. Whereas with Cal, you're seeing the effect of the long-term thing of living with that, you know, like his choices in it are driven by that experience.
Yeah, his whole career is kind of governed by that. And I think his understanding of the people that he's interviewing is very strong, because he truly can stand in their shoes and say, yeah, I know what it feels like to go through your whole life. And I think for me, it just seems like something so intolerable when you read about these people whose children went missing 30 years ago, or, you know, like how they must have to struggle through it. I just find it almost unfathomable. And so, yeah, that was definitely something I wanted to kind of shine a light on. I'm much more interested in victims and their families than I am in the perpetrator, really, I think.
And I think that's quite a sort of a refreshing thing in fiction, to sort of see that being told like that.
Yeah, I think that's the podcast as well, do the same thing. They kind of bring light to people who previously were maybe silent in the whole process.
I think there is a bit more of a movement of that in general, isn't there? Things like the 5 that like Ollie Rubenhold wrote and stuff, that sort of tries to give you a different, you know, like the story's always about the person who's done the crime. It's never about the people.
Yeah, and the names that are remembered are often the killers, not the victims themselves. Yeah, no, I think it is good. And I think certain news outlets now will publish pictures of victims and not the perpetrators, to try and not give them this notoriety that some people might welcome, I suppose. So yeah, it's an uncomfortable thing. But then we're all fascinated by darkness as well. And it's quite compelling, you know, these people, to think, what is it about them? Why did they do that? What, we want to understand it. And sometimes I don't think you can.
Well, it's often a sort of a mixture of your life events, isn't it? You know, people.
Yeah.
There's very rarely people who do things to be truly bad. You know, a lot of the times it's desperation or like other things that have
absolutely
driven them to a
so
place
hard, isn't it? Because you might have a set of circumstances and one person who, you know, goes one way and somebody else doesn't. And what's the difference between, there's all sorts of research, isn't there, about, you know, somebody might have a really difficult upbringing in really horrible circumstances, but they've got somebody who's supportive of them, and that's why they were able to build, you know, a life, and someone else has gone completely off the rails. And yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? This combination of nature and nurture and circumstance and everything.
Makes
a lot
for,
of fun.
Yeah, makes for some interesting
Crime stories. Yeah.
But I think exploring that kind of thing through fiction, even though it's fiction, makes people think about stuff in real life as well.
Yeah,
You
definitely.
can kind of learn through fiction in the same way, can't you? And have views challenged and be made to think a different way.
Yeah, I think crime fiction is very much a sort of social commentary, and it's, you know, it's really of its time. And I think it's one of the genres that tackles, you can really see the changes in crime fiction. Like, I think even a book that I would have written 6 or 7 years ago in some ways is sort of out of date in terms of what the important issues were then and how we move on, and we kind of deal with the things and we accept them, and our views change, and then there's something new that crops up.
Similar to what you can get in dystopia as well. You can challenge a lot of kind of social issues and things and that too. Maybe why you're drawn to both.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
We've got 4 minutes left. Give everyone you've got the covers in the background. Give everyone a reminder of what they're going to go off and buy.
Okay, hang on. So that's number 1, which is Unsolved. And this one basically starts, the case in this is a woman who rode her horse into the woods 35 years ago and never came out. And so Cal investigates her disappearance. And then this is Unburied, which is just out yesterday. And yeah, this is the one that's set on the west coast of Scotland, and it's a farmhouse shooting that has ripped apart a community, and there's still no answers as to what happened.
So go away and buy those. And what other book events have you got coming up?
What am I doing? So I'm off to Scotland next week to visit lots of different shops. I'm going to all over the place: Edinburgh, Glasgow, St Andrews, Dundee, Aberdeen. I'm doing an event in Perth next Wednesday, a Q&A, an evening event, and I am doing an event in a community bookshop called Orbs in Huntly in Aberdeenshire on Friday, which is actually the closest bookshop to where book 1 is set, because I grew up there in the foothills of Benahee, which is a hill there, and the bookshop is really close to that. So that'll be really nice to be there talking about that. And then I'm up in Whitley Bay for Bay Tales in March, doing Noir at the Bar there. And there's Diary of a Debut Novelist, which is an online series of events organised by Emma Christie. I'm doing one of those on the 31st of January. That's all I can remember at the moment.
Are you going to any festivals this year, Donna asks?
I will be. I think I'll go to Harrogate, and I'll go to Bloody Scotland, and I'm going to Crime Fest. Oh yes, so I would hopefully be speaking at Crime Fest. We don't have the programme yet, but I love festivals, and it's a lovely chance to meet readers and also to catch up with other authors. So yeah, as many of those as I can get to as possible.
Marvellous. I tend to go to Harrogate every year, so
it's great, isn't it? Yeah.
Keep an eye out for you. It's nice. I only tend to go for one day.
That's quite wise, actually, because it is full on if you go for 3 or 4.
Once you get drawn into like their tents, you don't tend to. I didn't go to any panels last year.
Yeah. Well, I'm quite lucky because my I've got family living in Harrogate, so I can go and stay there, and my husband and kids come up as well, and see family while I'm there. So
you just have a nice time. Yeah. Donna's saying she'll get your books and see you at Bay Tales, Crime Fest and Harrogate.
Hey, brilliant. Oh yes, definitely.
You can get them signed as well then, Donna. And Sam says thanks for a brilliant hour and congratulations.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me. I love doing UK Crime Book Club. It's really fun chats.
You're welcome. Anytime. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Have a lovely evening.